My brother got engaged to a millionaire heiress, and my parents decided I was too embarrassing for the New Year's Eve party. Your brothers-in-laws are elite, and you will humiliate us, my dad said. They locked me in the kitchen like a dirty secret. They told the guests I was in a mental institution. But they did not know that the judge they would face in court the next day was the one man who knew exactly who I was. When he leaned forward and whispered my name, my father's life ended. Before I tell you how I destroyed them, tell me in the comments if you have ever been the black sheep of your family. Hit like and subscribe because this payoff is going to be delicious. My name is Nia Washington, and at 32 years old, I am usually the one asking the questions. But on that New Year's Eve, sitting on a wobbly stool in the back of a rented mansion, I was the prisoner. I swirled the cheap tap water in my glass and looked at the swinging door that separated me from the party. Through the wood, I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses and the smooth notes of a live jazz band. My parents, Marcus and Beatrice, had rented this villa to impress the Kensingtons, an old money-white family worth billions. They spent their entire retirement savings on one night to secure my brother Jamal's place in high society. And where was I? I was hidden away next to the garbage disposal. The door swung open and my mother Beatrice stormed in. She did not look like my mother that night. She looked like a desperate woman trying to sell a lie. The smell of expensive perfume masked the scent of her anxiety. She grabbed the glass of water from my hand and slammed it onto the granite counter so hard I thought it would shatter. "Look at you," she hissed, her voice dripping with disdain as she looked me up and down. "You look like you just walked off a public bus. We told the Kensingtons you are away at a treatment facility. Do not dare step foot out there. Chloe Kensington is used to class, Nia, not whatever cheap and dark vibes you are giving off." She adjusted her sequined dress, a dress she could not actually afford, and looked at my navy blue suit with disgust. To her, I was just a public defender making pennies, a stain on their perfect image. She poked a manicured finger into my chest. "If you ruin this for Jamal, I will make sure you have nowhere left to go," she threatened. "Stay in here and be quiet." She turned around and marched out, locking the door from the outside. I listened to the lock click. It was a sound I would never forget. I picked up my glass of water again and took a slow sip. Outside, they were toasting to a future they thought they had secured. Inside, I was checking my watch. Let them have their champagne. I knew something they didn't. The lease on this villa wasn't the only thing expiring tonight. My mother thought she locked a victim in the kitchen, but she had actually locked a prosecutor in with the evidence. And the trial was about to begin. The door clicked open again, but it was not for my freedom. It was for his vanity. Jamal walked in and the first thing I heard was the expensive tap of his Italian leather loafers against the cheap kitchen tile. He did not even look at me. He walked straight to the stainless steel refrigerator and used it as a mirror to fix his silk bow tie. He was the golden child, the prince of a kingdom built on debt and delusion. He was wearing a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that I knew cost $5,000. I knew the price because I saw the withdrawal notification on my father's phone before they locked me out of the accounts. That suit cost more than my first car. And he wore it with the arrogance of a man who had never earned a single dime of the wealth he flashed. "Do I look sharp? Or do I look sharp?" Jamal asked, finally turning to face me. He did not wait for an answer. He smirked, brushing a speck of imaginary dust off his lapel. "This is Italian wool, Nia. Real quality. You would not know anything about that, would you? What is that you are wearing?" "Polyester blend from a discount rack. It smells like failure." I sat on the stool, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. He was not just my brother. He was a parasite in a silk suit. While I worked double shifts to pay for law school, Jamal was failing out of business programs that my parents paid for. Yet here he was, about to marry into the Kensington dynasty, acting like he was the one who made sacrifices. "Chloe and her father are pulling up in the driveway right now," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Listen to me clearly, Nia. Mr. Kensington is worth more than this entire neighborhood combined. This marriage is my ticket. It is our ticket. Do not ruin this for me." He looked at me with genuine disgust as if my presence alone was a contagious disease. Mom and Dad are right about you, he continued, checking his Rolex. Another gift I was never supposed to know about. You are just a bitter, jealous weight around our necks. Stay in here. Keep your mouth shut. Do not let your poverty rub off on my future. If I hear a single peep from this kitchen, I will make sure you are committed to that asylum for real. He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the scent of expensive cologne and rot in the air. He thought he was walking toward his coronation. He had no idea he was walking into a courtroom, and he definitely did not know that the sister he just called a failure was the only one in the room with the power to send him to federal prison. The silence Jamal left behind in the kitchen was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of every sacrifice I had been forced to make for him. As I stared at the stainless steel reflection of my cheap suit, the kitchen walls dissolved, dragging me back to the freezing morning 6 months ago that severed the last thread of loyalty I held for my family. That was the day I learned that my survival meant nothing compared to my brother's image. I remembered walking out of my apartment building at 6 in the morning, ready for a high-stakes trial, only to find my parking spot empty. My Honda Civic, the car I had paid for with waitressing tips and sleepless nights, was gone. I thought it was stolen. I called my father, panic rising in my throat, only to hear him chewing his breakfast calmly on the other end of the line. We had to sell it, Nia, Marcus had said as if he were discussing the weather. Jamal needed the deposit for Chloe's engagement ring. You know the Kensingtons expect a certain caliber of diamond. A 4-carat ring requires sacrifices. You can take the bus. It builds character. He hung up before I could scream. He had stolen my property, forged my signature on the title transfer, and sold my only mode of transportation to buy a rock for a billionaire's daughter who probably used diamonds as paperweights. That morning, a blizzard hit Chicago. The wind off Lake Michigan was like a knife slicing through my thin coat as I trudged 6 blocks to the bus stop. The buses were delayed. The trial started in an hour. I had no choice but to walk the remaining 2 miles to the federal courthouse. I marched through the gray slush, my feet numb, my face stinging from the ice. I was a federal prosecutor, a woman who put dangerous criminals behind bars, yet I was shivering like a homeless person because my parents decided my brother's vanity was more important than my safety. Then I heard the roar of an engine. A sleek black Porsche Cayenne came tearing down the street. It was the car my parents had leased for Jamal to help him look the part of a tech mogul. I recognized the license plate immediately. KNG Jamal. The car swerved close to the curb, hitting a massive puddle of freezing, dirty slush. A wave of black water and ice crashed over me, soaking my coat, my hair, and the case files in my bag. I gasped from the shock of the cold. The Porsche did not stop. It did not slow down. Through the tinted window, I saw the passenger side roll down just an inch. I heard Jamal's laughter. It was loud, carefree, and cruel. He honked the horn twice, a cheerful little beep, and sped off toward the warmth of his life, leaving me freezing on the side of the road. I stood there shivering uncontrollably, water dripping from my eyelashes. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter. As I wiped the mud from my face, I realized that they would happily watch me freeze to death if it meant Jamal could be warm. But as I walked into that courtroom soaked and shivering and still won my case an hour later, I made a vow. The next time Jamal saw me, I would not be the victim on the side of the road. I would be the oncoming traffic. The atmosphere in the living room shifted the moment the heavy oak doors opened. It was no longer a party. It was a performance. Through the narrow gap in the swinging kitchen door, I watched the arrival of the people my parents had bankrupted themselves to impress. William Kensington walked in first. He was a man who did not need to raise his voice to command a room. He wore a charcoal gray suit that looked simple to the untrained eye, but was cut from vicuna wool that cost more than my parents' entire life insurance policy. Beside him was Chloe. She was not dripping in diamonds like my mother. She wore a simple cream silk dress and small pearl earrings. That was the difference between us and them. My family screamed for attention with logos and sequins. The Kensingtons whispered power with silence. My father, Marcus, practically ran to the door, his smile so wide it looked painful. He bowed slightly, a gesture of submission that made my stomach turn. William Chloe. Welcome to our humble abode, my father said, sweeping his arm across the rented foyer, as if he actually owned the deed. We are so honored you could join us for this intimate gathering. My mother Beatrice was right behind him, her hands clasped together like she was praying to a deity. She laughed too loud at nothing in particular. "Oh, stop it, Marcus," she chimed in, her voice high and shrill. "Please come in. Can I get you a drink? We have the 1995 vintage that Jamal specifically selected for tonight." She snapped her fingers at a server, treating the staff with the same disdain she showed me just to prove she had authority. Then came the main event. Jamal stepped forward from the fireplace where he had been posing. He adjusted his cuffs, puffing out his chest like a peacock trying to intimidate an eagle. "Mr. Kensington," Jamal said, extending his hand with practiced firmness. "It is an honor. I have been following your acquisition of the energetic sector. Bold move. Reminds me of a few plays I am making with my own tech firm right now." I nearly choked on my own breath. His tech firm. Jamal did not have a firm. He had a laptop and a folder full of rejection letters from legitimate investors. He was running a Ponzi scheme disguised as a cryptocurrency startup, but to the Kensingtons, he was presented as a prodigy. William Kensington took Jamal's hand, his grip brief and clinical. He looked at Jamal with eyes that had analyzed billion-dollar mergers. He did not look impressed, he looked skeptical. "Interesting," William said, his voice deep and dry. "I would love to see your audit reports sometime. The tech sector is volatile right now." My father jumped in before Jamal could stutter. "Oh, Jamal is modest, William. He is absolutely crushing the market. He is a visionary, just like you were at his age. That is why we think he and Chloe are such a perfect match. Two dynasties coming together." Chloe stood silently by her father's side. She looked bored, scanning the room with tired eyes. She looked like a woman who had been dragged to a play she had seen 1,000 times. She did not look at Jamal with love. She looked at him with tolerance. My parents continued to fawn over them, offering trays of hors d'oeuvres and laughing aggressively at jokes William had not even made yet. It was pathetic. It was a masterclass in desperation. And I knew that the moment the Kensingtons realized this entire evening was a charade funded by stolen money, the explosion would be loud enough to shatter every window in this fake mansion. The charade was going too perfectly, which meant disaster was overdue. From my exile in the kitchen, I heard the undeniable sound of crystal hitting the floor, followed by a collective gasp that sucked the air out of the room. It was the sound of expensive mistakes. Then came the scream. Not from the victim, but from the oppressor. "You clumsy idiot," my father bellowed. His voice vibrated through the walls. I knew that tone. It was the sound of a small man trying to project big power. "Get out. You are fired. Do you know who these people are?" I pressed my ear against the wood. I could hear the young server sobbing her apologies, drowned out by my mother's frantic shrieking. "Oh my God, the dress! The silk is ruined. Get her out of here, Marcus, before she breaks something else." My parents were bullying a minimum wage worker to save face in front of billionaires. The injustice of it clawed at my throat. I am a federal prosecutor. My entire life is dedicated to stepping in when the powerful abuse the weak. I do not hide when things go wrong. I fix them. The warning from Jamal about staying hidden dissolved instantly. I was not going to sit on a stool while my father humiliated a girl for an accident. I grabbed a bottle of club soda and a clean white linen cloth from the counter. My eyes locked on the swinging door. My mother had locked it from the outside, but it was a flimsy residential lock, not a prison cell. I took a step back and drove my heel into the wood right next to the latch. With a sharp crack, the frame gave way. I stepped into the foyer, and the scene was pathetic. A young girl was trembling in the center of the room, tears streaming down her face as my father loomed over her, his finger pointed like a weapon. My mother was on her knees, uselessly rubbing a cocktail napkin against Chloe Kensington's dress, which was only grinding the red wine deeper into the cream fabric. Chloe stood there frozen, looking more uncomfortable with my parents' reaction than with the stain itself. "Stop it!" My voice rang out sharp and commanding. It was my courtroom voice, the voice that made defendants flinch. The room fell silent. My father froze, his hand still raised in anger. I walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture. I did not look at his shocked expression. I walked straight to Chloe, uncapping the club's soda with a calm precision that contrasted with the chaos around us. "Move your hand." "Beatrice," I said to my mother, not calling her mom. "You are setting the stain." I knelt down, not in submission but in service of the solution. I poured the soda onto the cloth and began to dab the silk with practiced, gentle movements. The carbonation sizzled, lifting the red pigment from the fibers before it could bond. "It was an accident, Marcus," I said without looking up, continuing to work on the dress. "Stop screaming at the staff. It makes you look desperate." For 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the fizz of the soda and the terrified breathing of the server. I had just taken control of their stage, and when I finally stood up, the stain was gone, but the real mess was just beginning. I turned to look at Chloe, and that was when the air left the room completely. I straightened up, dropping the soiled linen onto a passing waiter's tray without breaking eye contact. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. My parents were holding their breath, waiting for the Kensingtons to explode to demand an explanation for why the help was speaking so boldly. But Chloe Kensington was not looking at my parents. She was looking at me. Her eyes, previously dull with boredom, were now wide and focused. She studied my face, tracing the sharp line of my jaw and the cold determination in my eyes. It was a look I knew well. It was the look defendants gave me right before I delivered a closing argument that would send them away for 20 years. "You handled that red wine like it was a crime scene," Chloe said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Efficient. Ruthless. I know that technique." She took a step closer to me, ignoring my father, who was frantically trying to intervene. "Ms. Kensington, please." My father stammered, sweating profusely. "This is just Nia. She is nobody. She is just leaving." Chloe raised a hand to silence him without even looking in his direction. Her gaze remained locked on mine. "I know you," she whispered. "I saw you in the federal court last month. You are the one they call the Grim Reaper. You are Senior Assistant U.S. Attorney Nia Washington." The title hung in the air like a guillotine blade. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jamal dropped his glass. They had spent years telling everyone I was a low-level clerk, a failure, a mental case. They had no idea that in the city of Chicago, my name struck fear into the hearts of corrupt politicians and white-collar criminals. Chloe continued, her voice gaining strength. "You are the prosecutor who took down the sprawling cartel case last year. My uncle Judge Sterling talks about you. He says you are the most terrifying woman in the Department of Justice because you never lose." I smiled, a small, dangerous curve of my lips. "Your uncle is too kind." "Ms. Kensington," I replied, my voice smooth and controlled. "And please call me Nia. We are practically family, aren't we?" The color drained from my father's face. He looked from me to Chloe, his brain unable to process the shift in reality. The daughter he had beaten down and hidden in the kitchen was suddenly the most powerful person in the room. He opened his mouth to lie, to spin some web of deceit, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He realized for the first time that he was not the one in charge anymore. The lion he thought he had caged was actually standing right in front of him, and the cage door was wide open. My father moved with the desperate speed of a man watching his life insurance policy go up in flames. He threw his body between me and Chloe Kensington, physically blocking her line of sight, as if I were a loaded weapon pointed at her chest. His face, which had been pale with fear seconds ago, flushed red with the manic energy of a seasoned liar. He laughed, but it was a brittle, high-pitched sound that cracked in the middle. "Oh, Miss Kensington, you have to forgive her," he stammered, sweat beading visibly on his upper lip. He waved his hands frantically, trying to erase the reality Chloe had just recognized. This is exactly what we were afraid of. This is the tragedy we tried to shield you from. Poor Nia is having one of her episodes again. He turned to look at me with eyes that promised violence, but his voice was dripping with fake, sickening pity. She reads about these powerful figures in the newspapers, and she convinces herself she is them. He lied, the words spilling out like vomit. It is a severe case of dissociative identity disorder mixed with delusions of grandeur. Last week she thought she was the Surgeon General. Today she thinks she is a federal prosecutor. It is heartbreaking, really. She has been off her medication for days. Chloe took a step back, her brow furrowed in confusion. She looked from my father's sweating face to my calm, stone-cold expression. "But Marcus," she said slowly, doubt creeping into her voice. "She looks identical to the photos in the press, and the way she handled that situation just now. That did not seem like a delusion." My mother, Beatrice, sensing that the dam was breaking, rushed forward to reinforce the wall of lies. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my flesh hard enough to draw blood, but she smiled at Chloe like a saint. "It is part of the illness, honey," my mother chimed in, her voice trembling with a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Nia has been obsessed with the law ever since she failed the bar exam 3 times. She created this fantasy life to cope with her failures. We have been trying to get her help for years, but she keeps escaping the facility. She can be very convincing when she wants to be, and very dangerous." I stood there motionless, letting them weave their web. I did not scream. I did not fight. A crazy person would scream. A crazy person would try to prove they were sane. But a prosecutor knows that sometimes you let the witness perjure themselves completely before you destroy them. Every lie they told was another nail in their coffin. "Get her out of here!" My father barked at the 2 private security guards hovering by the entrance. His nice guy mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the tyrant underneath. "Take her to the back room and lock her in until the transport van arrives. Do not let her speak to anyone. She is a liability." The guards, big men who were paid not to ask questions, grabbed me by the arms. As they dragged me away from the chandelier light and back toward the darkness of the hallway, I did not struggle. I locked eyes with Chloe one last time. She looked confused, scared, and unsure. Then I looked at Jamal. He was standing behind her, raising his champagne glass to his lips, a smirk playing on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had silenced the embarrassment. He had no idea that he had just handed me the weapon I would use to execute his future. They dragged me into the dark, but my mind was already in the courtroom, writing the opening statement that would end them all. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom clicked shut, sealing away the music, the laughter, and the illusion of a happy family. The moment we were alone in the narrow service corridor, the mask of the concerned father fell away, revealing the monster underneath. The lighting here was dim, cast by a single flickering bulb that threw long, distorted shadows against the peeling wallpaper. My father dismissed the security guards with a sharp jerk of his head. As soon as their footsteps faded, he spun around. There was no warning. His hand connected with my cheekbone with a sickening crack that echoed down the hallway. The force of the blow was not just physical, it was filled with decades of resentment. I lost my footing and crumbled to the cold, hard linoleum floor. The taste of copper filled my mouth as my teeth cut into the inside of my lip. I did not cry out. I refused to give him that satisfaction. I simply looked up, wiping the blood from my mouth, staring at the man who had failed me since birth. "You ungrateful wretch!" my father hissed, his voice trembling with a rage so potent it sprayed spittle onto my face. "You almost ruined everything. Do you have any idea how much this night cost us? Do you know how close we are to securing the Kensington fortune? And you walk out there like a self-righteous ghost trying to haunt us. Why are you still here, Nia? Why do you insist on breathing the same air as us? You are a curse. You have always been a curse on this family." He raised his hand to strike me again, his breathing ragged and heavy. He looked at me, not as his daughter, but as an obstacle, a weed in his perfect garden that needed to be ripped out by the roots. I braced myself for the second hit, but it never came. My mother stepped out of the shadows. She had been standing there the whole time, watching with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. She did not rush to protect me. She did not scream for him to stop. She simply checked her diamond watch, annoyed that this beating was taking up valuable networking time. "Stop it, Marcus," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Hitting her is useless. It does not fix the problem. Look at her. She is defiant. If we kick her out onto the street tonight, she will just circle back. She will find a way to crash the wedding. She will talk to the press. She will poison Chloe against Jamal." My father lowered his hand, his chest heaving. "So what do we do, Beatrice? We cannot let her walk free. She is a loose cannon." My mother looked down at me, her lip curling in disgust. She looked at me like I was a piece of gum stuck to her expensive heel. "We do not kick her out," she said, a cruel, calculating smile spreading across her face. "We lock her up. You told Chloe she was crazy. You told the security she was delusional. Let us make that the official story. We file the emergency conservatorship petition tonight. We claim she is a danger to herself and others. By tomorrow morning, she will be in a state facility, sedated and silent." My father's eyes lit up. It was the look of a man who had just been handed a loaded gun. "A 72-hour psychiatric hold," he muttered, a grin forming. "That gets us through the wedding. That gets us through the signing of the marriage license." "Exactly," my mother said, smoothing her dress. "And once she is in the system, we control her assets. We control her life. She won't be Nia Washington, the high-powered attorney, anymore. She will just be patient number 402. I lay on the floor listening to them plot to steal my freedom. My cheek throbbed, but my mind was razor sharp. They thought this was the end of me. They thought a locked room would break me. They had no idea that they were not locking me away from the world. They were locking themselves in a cage with a predator who was just waiting for the right moment to bite. The security guards shoved me into a cramped storage room, and the heavy door clicked shut. It was pitch black inside, smelling of dust and old cleaning chemicals. I slid down the wall until I hit the floor, ignoring the throbbing pain in my cheek, where my father had struck me. Most women in my position would have been hyperventilating, banging on the door, begging to be let out. But I sat in the silence and did what I do best. I listened. The walls of this old rented mansion were thin, and my family was arrogant. They thought walls were soundproof. They thought I was defeated. They did not realize that by locking me in here, they had placed me directly behind the thin drywall of the private study, where they were now finalizing their plan. I pressed my ear against the cold plaster. I heard the distinct sound of ice hitting a glass. My father was pouring himself a drink. "We have to move fast, Marcus." My mother's voice drifted through the wall, sharp and calculating. "We cannot just hold her for 72 hours. She will get out. She will sue us. She will go to the press. We need something permanent." There was a pause, followed by the rustling of papers. "I spoke to Dr. Vance," my father replied. "He owes me a favor from that gambling debt I covered last year. He is willing to testify that Nia has a history of violent outbursts and delusional episodes. We file for a permanent conservatorship, Beatrice. Just like the Spears case. We argue that she is mentally incapacitated and cannot manage her own affairs." My blood ran cold. A conservatorship would strip me of my rights. I would not be able to hire a lawyer, access my bank accounts, or even make medical decisions without their permission. They were trying to erase my existence as a legal adult. "But why go through all that trouble for Nia?" Jamal's voice chimed in. He sounded bored, likely scrolling on his phone. "Just kick her out and change the locks." "Use your brain for once, Jamal," my mother snapped. "Think about that apartment she is living in downtown, the doorman building, the view." I looked up the property records. It is in a trust, but someone is paying those maintenance fees. She is hiding money. Probably illicit money from whatever shady things she does. If we get the conservatorship, we get control of her assets. We get the apartment. I covered my mouth to stifle a dark laugh. They thought I was a criminal. They thought my success was a scam. They wanted to steal the penthouse I bought with my own salary because they could not fathom that I was more successful than them. That apartment would be perfect for my crypto mining setup. Jamal said, his tone shifting from boredom to greed. And if we control her accounts, we can use her savings to pay off the Kensington's wedding planner. The deposit is due on Monday. Do it, my father said, the sound of his glass slamming down, sealing the deal. I will call Vance now. I will call. We will have her committed by sunrise. She will never step foot in a courtroom again unless she is in shackles. I pulled away from the wall. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They were not just abusive parents anymore. They were conspirators in a federal crime. They were planning fraud, kidnapping, and perjury. They wanted to take my life, my home, and my freedom. I reached into my bra and pulled out the small, sleek burner phone I had hidden earlier. The screen glowed in the darkness. I did not call for help. I sent a text to my lead investigator. It was 3 words. Execute Order 66. They wanted a war. I was about to bring them a nuclear winter. An hour later, while I was still locked in the storage room, my father was sitting in an office that smelled of stale cigar smoke and moral decay. He was meeting with Richard Vance, a lawyer known throughout Chicago, not for his skill in the courtroom, but for his ability to bury the truth. Vance sat behind a mahogany desk that cost more than my parents' car, swirling a glass of amber liquid. He was the kind of man who smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes. My father sat opposite him, wringing his hands, looking like a man trying to justify a murder. She is out of control, Richard. My father lied, his voice trembling with fake concern. Tonight was the final straw. She attacked a guest. She was screaming about being a federal prosecutor. She is hallucinating. We need to protect her from herself before she hurts someone or ruins Jamal's wedding. Vance nodded slowly, tapping a gold pen against the leather desk pad. He did not care about the truth. He cared about the retainer fee my father had just transferred from a credit card that was already maxed out. It sounds like a tragic case of acute paranoid schizophrenia with violent tendencies, Vance said smoothly. The courts take this very seriously, Marcus. If she is a danger to the community, we have a duty to intervene. We can file for an emergency temporary conservatorship. My father leaned in, greed flashing in his eyes. And if we get it, what does that mean for her assets? She has an apartment downtown. She has accounts we cannot access. Vance smiled, a predatory expression that revealed yellowed teeth. If the judge grants the order, you become her legal guardian. Her rights are suspended. You control her medical treatment, her residence, and most importantly, her finances. Her bank accounts become your bank accounts to manage for her benefit, of course. My father sat back, visibly relaxed. The guilt of betraying his daughter vanished the moment he heard he would get control of my money. But we need a medical evaluation, my father said. Nia is smart. She will not talk to a doctor. Vance laughed, a dry, rasping sound. You are paying for the premium package, Marcus. You do not need her cooperation. I have a psychiatrist on my payroll, Dr. Eris. He owes me a significant favor. He will sign the affidavit tonight, stating he evaluated her and found her to be in a psychotic state. By the time the sun comes up, that document will be on a judge's desk. Vance slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a petition to strip me of my civil rights based on lies. Sign here, Vance said. And by tomorrow morning, Nia Washington will legally cease to be a person. She will just be a file number under your control. My father picked up the pen. He did not hesitate. He did not think about the little girl he used to push on the swings. He thought about the Kensington fortune. He signed his name with a flourish, sealing my fate with a stroke of ink. He thought he was solving a problem. He did not know he was handing me the evidence for his own indictment. The heavy oak door creaked open, breaking the silence of my confinement. It was not my father or my mother who stepped inside. It was a stranger. He was a small man with shifting eyes and a suit that was slightly too large for his frame. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a hand to shake. He simply pulled a wooden chair to the center of the room, sat down, and opened a leather notebook. This was Dr. Eris. I recognized him instantly, not from a hospital directory, but from a case file I had reviewed years ago involving insurance fraud. He was not here to heal me. He was here to bury me. Please sit down. Nia, Dr. Aris said, gesturing to the sofa. His voice was flat and rehearsed. I am just here to have a friendly chat. Your father is very worried about your mental state. I remained standing. I knew that sitting would be a sign of submission. I crossed my arms and looked him dead in the eye. I am not your patient, I said clearly, and you have not obtained my consent for a medical evaluation. Anything you write in that notebook is inadmissible. Dr. Aris did not flinch. He did not even look up. He simply scribbled something on his pad. I tilted my head slightly and read the upside-down text. Patient is combative and resistant to authority. The trap was set. He was not recording my answers. He was recording a pre-written narrative. Do you often feel like people are plotting against you? He asked without looking at me. I laughed a dry, humorless sound. I am currently locked in a storage room while my parents discuss seizing my assets with a corrupt lawyer. That is not a feeling, doctor. That is a fact. He nodded slowly, as if he expected that answer. He wrote again. Severe paranoid delusions involving family members. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was a kangaroo court disguised as a medical consult. He asked me if I had trouble sleeping. I told him I worked 80 hours a week fighting criminals. He wrote down manic episodes and inability to rest. He asked if I ever felt violent. I told him I aggressively pursued justice. He wrote down admitted history of aggression and potential for physical violence. Every truth I spoke was twisted into a symptom. Every logical defense was categorized as a manic outburst. I realized that arguing with him was useless. He had already cashed the check. The diagnosis was decided before he even walked through the door. I stopped speaking. I walked over to him and leaned down until my face was inches from his. You can write whatever lies you want in that book, I whispered, my voice low and dangerous. But remember this. Perjury is a felony. And when I get out of here, I will not just sue you for malpractice. I will have your medical license revoked and framed on my wall. Dr. Aris finally looked up. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. He closed his notebook with a snap. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. Patient made direct threats against medical staff, he muttered as he hurried toward the door. Exhibits extreme hostility. He slipped out of the room and the lock clicked shut again. He had what he needed. In less than 5 minutes, he had manufactured enough insanity to strip a federal prosecutor of her civil rights. I stood alone in the dark room, listening to his footsteps fade away. My heart was pounding not from fear, but from a cold, calculating rage. They thought they had just signed my death warrant. But all they had done was hand me the evidence for the biggest case of my career. The paper trail had just begun. The silence of the storage room was shattered not by a key turning in the lock, but by the wail of sirens cutting through the winter night. It was a sound I knew well from my line of work, usually signaling that justice was coming. But tonight the sirens were not for my protection. They were part of the performance. The door to my makeshift prison was yanked open by my father. He did not look angry anymore. He looked like a grieving parent. He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, and pulled me out into the blinding strobe of red and blue lights that were already washing over the foyer. Come on, Nia, he whispered, his voice trembling with fake sorrow. The police are here to help you. We cannot handle your episodes anymore. He dragged me to the front door and pushed me out onto the porch. The cold air hit my face, stinging the cut on my lip. 2 squad cars were parked in the driveway, blocking the exit. The neighbors, people who lived in million-dollar homes and thrived on gossip, were already standing on their lawns wrapped in cashmere coats, whispering and pointing. And then the show began. My mother, Beatrice, threw herself into the arms of a police officer. She was sobbing, her shoulders shaking violently. She threatened to burn the house down. She wailed loud enough for the neighbors across the street to hear. She said she would kill us all in our sleep. We are so scared, officer. Please, you have to help our daughter. She is not in her right mind. The officer, a local cop named Miller, who I recognized from high school as a bully with a badge, looked at me with disgust. He saw a woman with messy hair, a swollen lip, and a cheap suit, standing silent and stoic. He did not see a victim of abuse. He saw exactly what my parents wanted him to see: a dangerous, unstable lunatic. Nia Washington Officer Miller barked, resting his hand on his holster. "Step away from your parents. Keep your hands where I can see them." I slowly raised my hands. I did not scream. I did not try to explain that my mother was lying. I knew that resisting arrest would only validate their story. Miller walked up the steps and shoved a piece of yellow paper into my chest. "This is an emergency order of protection and a summons for a mandatory psychiatric evaluation," he said, spitting the words at me. "Your parents have filed a petition claiming you are an immediate danger to yourself and others. You are to report to the county facility immediately for processing. If you resist, you will be placed in handcuffs." I took the paper. My hands were steady. I looked past the officer to my mother. She paused her crying just long enough to give me a smirk that chilled my blood. She had turned the community against me. She had weaponized the police. She thought she had won. But as I looked at Officer Miller's badge number, memorizing it for the lawsuit I would file later, I realized they had made a fatal error. They had put everything on public record. The police report, the false statements, the fake tears. They wanted a scene. I would give them a scene. I walked toward the police car with my head high, walking past the neighbors who judged me, knowing that the walk of shame they intended for me was actually my march toward victory. The red and blue lights of the police cruiser faded into the distance, leaving me standing on the porch with a summons in my hand and a timeline that was rapidly collapsing. I had until 8 in the morning to surrender myself for evaluation or face an arrest warrant. I walked back into the house past my parents, who were already celebrating in the living room, clinking glasses as if they had just won the lottery. I did not look at them. I marched straight to my bedroom and locked the door. I needed a lawyer, not a public defender, but a shark who could eat Dr. Eris and Lawyer Vance for breakfast. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, intending to wire a $50,000 retainer to my friend at a top defense firm. The screen loaded for a second, and then flashed a message that made my stomach drop. Account frozen. Contact. Account holder. I tried my savings account. Access denied. I tried my investment portfolio. User locked. My hands shook as the realization hit me. When I was 18 and heading to college, my father had co-signed my very first checking account. Over the years, as I climbed the ladder of federal justice, I had simply linked my new high-yield accounts to that original profile for convenience. I had prosecuted financial crimes for a decade, yet I had committed the rookie mistake of leaving a financial backdoor open to the people who hated me most. My father had not just frozen my access. The balance showed zero. He had drained everything. Every bonus, every paycheck, every cent I had saved from putting criminals behind bars was gone, transferred out minutes after he signed the conservatorship petition. I was a high-powered federal prosecutor, and I suddenly did not have enough money to buy a bottle of water, let alone hire a legal defense team. The door to my room swung open. Jamal stood there, leaning against the frame, swirling a glass of scotch he did not have the palate to appreciate. He watched me, staring at my empty bank balance, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "Dad moves fast, doesn't he?" Jamal said, taking a slow sip. "He is already transferring the funds to the wedding planner. Chloe is going to have real orchids now, thanks to you." He walked over to where I sat on the edge of the bed. He looked down at me, enjoying the shift in power. For his entire life, I had been the successful one, the one with the money and the career. Now in his eyes, I was just a destitute mental patient. "You look pathetic, Nia," he sneered. "All that education, all those fancy suits, and you are just a broke girl sitting in her childhood bedroom. You can't even afford an Uber to the asylum, can you?" He reached into the pocket of his $5,000 tuxedo pants and pulled out a crumpled bill. He balled it up and tossed it at me. It bounced off my chest and landed on the floor. It was a $10 bill. Take the bus. He laughed, turning to walk away. Do not be late for your lobotomy. I stared at the money on the floor. I did not pick it up. I did not cry. I burned the image of that crumpled bill into my mind. Jamal thought he had stripped me of my power because he took my money. He did not understand that my currency was not dollars, it was evidence. And by stealing my life savings to fund his wedding, he had just given me the motive I needed to charge him with grand larceny. I reached under my mattress and pulled out the burner phone again. I did not need money to make the call I was about to make. I just needed the truth. The room was plunged into darkness, but for me it was not a prison. It was a war room. Downstairs I could hear the muffled sounds of my parents and Jamal celebrating. They were clinking glasses, toasting to their victory over the black sheep of the family. They thought that by freezing my bank accounts and stripping me of my cash, they had cut off my legs. They expected me to be curled up in a ball, sobbing into my pillow, waiting for the men in white coats to drag me away. My mother was probably standing outside the door right now, pressing her ear against the wood, hoping to hear the sweet sound of my spirit breaking. But silence is the loudest sound a prosecutor can make. I was not crying. I was calculating. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of old dust and new betrayal. I did not need their money to destroy them. I only needed my protocols. I slid off the mattress and lay flat on the floor, reaching my arm deep under the heavy oak bed frame. My fingers traced the wood until they found the loose floorboard I had pried open 3 years ago. It was a hiding spot I created not for drugs or diaries but for insurance. I pulled out a small waterproof bag. Inside was a black burner phone and an encrypted flash drive. My family saw me as a mental patient, but the Department of Justice saw me as a high-value asset. I prosecuted billionaires and cartels. Did my father really think I walked around without a contingency plan? I powered on the phone. The screen lit up, casting a ghostly blue glow across my face. It was the only light in the room. I did not call a friend. I did not call a defense attorney. I dialed a number that was routed through 3 different servers to avoid detection. It rang once. "This is the operator," a distorted voice answered. "Identify." "Agent Washington." I said, my voice devoid of any familial warmth. "Authorization code, Valkyrie 9. There was a pause, followed by the rapid sound of typing on the other end. "Identity confirmed, Agent Washington. We show your primary assets have been compromised. Are you in immediate danger?" I looked at the door. I thought about Jamal's smirk. I thought about my father's slap. I thought about the lie my mother told the police. "Negative," I replied. "The danger is not to me. The danger is to the targets." I paused for a second, letting the weight of what I was about to do settle in. Once I said these words, there was no going back. There would be no reconciliation, no family dinners, no forgiveness. I was about to burn my family tree to the ground. "Execute order read." I commanded, my voice cold as ice. "Target is the Washington family residence and all associated accounts. I want full forensic surveillance. I want their digital skeletons exposed. And I want the files on the Kensington merger sent to Judge Sterling's private server immediately." "Order read confirmed," the voice said. "Scorched earth protocol initiated. Good hunting, Agent." I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. I stood up and smoothed out my suit. In the darkness, I smiled. They had taken my money, but they had forgotten the most important rule of survival. You never corner a predator unless you are sure the cage is locked. And my cage was wide open. The door to my room crashed open again. This time, Jamal did not bother knocking or posing. He stumbled in, a half-empty bottle of vintage Cabernet swinging from his hand. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a noose he was too stupid to tighten. The smell of alcohol and arrogance rolled off him in waves. He leaned against the doorframe, swaying slightly, a lopsided grin plastered on his face. He looked at me sitting in the dark, the phone now hidden safely in my pocket, and he laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the ugly, wet sound of a man who thought he was untouchable. "You are still here," he slurred, taking a swig directly from the bottle. "I thought you would have run away by now, gone to cry under a bridge somewhere." He pushed off the wall and staggered toward me. He kicked at my leg, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to show he could. "You know, Nia," he said, dropping onto the end of my bed uninvited. "You really almost messed it up tonight. Dad was terrified. Mom was about to have a stroke. But me, I knew you were harmless. You have always been harmless. Just a little barking dog with no teeth." I stayed silent, my hand resting casually near my pocket thumb, hovering over the record button of the burner phone. I needed him to keep talking. Silence is the best interrogator. He took another drink, red wine dripping down his chin onto his white shirt. He did not care. He wiped it with his sleeve. "Tomorrow is going to be a great day," he mumbled, staring at the ceiling. "Once you are locked away, Chloe and I will sign the papers. And then I am free. Finally free." He looked at me, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "You think I love her, do not you?" He chuckled darkly. "You think I care about her boring stories and her stuck-up father? I do not give a damn about Chloe. She is just a signature Naya. That is all she is, a walking, talking bank account." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained stone. "Why marry her then, Jamal?" I asked softly, baiting the hook. "Why not just ask Dad for more money?" Jamal laughed so hard he choked. "Dad is tapped out, you idiot. Why do you think we needed your accounts?" "But Chloe, her last name opens doors. I am in deep, Nia. 2 million deep. I borrowed from some bad people to fund that crypto exchange. It is all gone. Poof. But once I am a Kensington, the investors will back off. I will use the wedding gift money to plug the hole in the pension fund I raided. Nobody will ever know." He leaned in close, his breath hot and sour. "I am going to use her, dump the debt, and live like a king. And you will be rotting in a cell eating jello." He patted my cheek, a condescending slap, and stumbled back out of the room laughing at his own brilliance. I waited until his footsteps faded. I pulled the phone out. The recording was crystal clear. He thought he was confessing to a defeated sister. He had just confessed to a federal prosecutor. The trap was snapped shut. The morning sun rose over Chicago, but for me, it brought a storm of notifications instead of warmth. I woke up to my phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. It was not alarm bells. It was the sound of my reputation being shredded in real time. I picked up the device and saw my face plastered across the screen. It was an unflattering photo from my college graduation, cropped and darkened to make me look disheveled and manic. The headline on the city's most popular local news blog was in bold red letters: "Obsessed Sibling, the Dark Secret of Tech Prodigy Jamal Washington's Family." I clicked the link. The article was a masterpiece of fiction. It cited unnamed family sources who claimed I had a history of arson, violent outbursts, and a pathological jealousy of my brother's success. It claimed I had threatened to harm Chloe Kensington out of spite. The comments section was a cesspool of judgment. Strangers who had never met me were calling for my imprisonment. "She looks psycho," one user wrote. "Keep her away from that nice couple," said another. My parents had not just filed a legal petition, they had launched a public execution of my character. They wanted to ensure that even if I somehow survived the court hearing, I would be too toxic to ever work in this city again. I walked to the top of the stairs and listened. The smell of fresh coffee and crisp bacon wafted up from the kitchen. It was the smell of celebration. I crept closer to the railing and looked down. My father was sitting at the island scrolling through the very same article on his tablet. He was chuckling. My mother was pouring orange juice, looking lighter and happier than she had in years. They looked like a couple who had just won the lottery, not parents who had just destroyed their daughter. "Look at this comment, Beatrice," my father laughed, tapping the screen. "Everyone is on our side. The community is terrified for us. We are the sympathetic victims." This reporter swallowed the story hook, line, and sinker. My mother smiled a cruel and satisfied expression that made her look 10 years younger. It worked better than I thought, she said, sipping her juice. By noon, she will not be able to get a job at a fast food joint, let alone practice law. We have completely discredited her. Even if she tries to speak up now, nobody will believe a certified lunatic over a grieving family. We have won Marcus. She is finished. I stood in the shadows watching them eat their victory breakfast. They were high on their own supply. They thought destroying my reputation was the final nail in the coffin. They did not understand how the law worked. They had just committed libel, defamation of character, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And they had done it on a public platform with a massive reach. Every click, every share, and every comment was quantifiable damage. They were not burying me under a mountain of shame. They were building the mountain of cash they would owe me in damages. I went back to my room and calmly took screenshots of every single article, every tweet, and every nasty comment. I uploaded them to the secure case file on my burner phone. They wanted a media circus. I would give them one. But the headline of the next story would not be about my insanity. It would be about their indictment. I turned off the notifications and started to get dressed. Let the world hate me for one more hour. By lunchtime, the truth would not just be known, it would be legally binding. The alarm on my phone did not need to go off. I had been awake since 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and breathing in the cold air of the room that used to be my sanctuary and was now my cell. Today was the day my family planned to erase me. They expected me to walk out of this room looking broken. They expected disheveled hair, puffy eyes, and mismatched clothes that would scream instability to the court. My mother had probably already scripted her tears for when she saw me looking pathetic. But as I threw the covers off, I made a decision. I was not going to their funeral for me. I was going to their execution. I walked to the back of the closet, past the old hoodies and jeans they assumed I lived in. I reached for the black garment bag hidden in the far corner. I unzipped it slowly, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. Inside hung my armor. It was not a dress. It was a midnight navy blue power suit, bespoke, tailored in Milan. It was the same suit I wore when I convicted the mayor for embezzlement. It was the color of authority, the color of the law. I set up the ironing board. The hiss of the steam was the only sound in the room. I pressed the white silk blouse until it was crisp enough to cut glass. I pressed the trousers, creating a pleat so sharp it looked like a weapon. This was not vanity. This was psychological warfare. When you walk into a courtroom, how you look is the first piece of evidence you present. If I looked like a victim, I would be treated like one. But if I looked like a predator, the judge would hesitate. I slipped into the trousers and buttoned the shirt. I felt my posture change. My spine straightened. The trembling in my hands stopped. I was no longer Nia, the disappointed daughter. I was Senior Assistant U.S. Attorney Washington. I pulled on the jacket and adjusted the collar. Then I reached into the small velvet box on the dresser. Inside was a small gold pin shaped like the scales of justice. It was given to me by the Attorney General. I did not pin it to the outside of my lapel where anyone could see. I pinned it on the inside, facing my heart. It was a secret reminder of who I truly was. I stepped into my black stiletto heels. Click, 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 click. The sound on the hardwood floor was rhythmic and terrifying. I looked in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back was not the girl who cried in the kitchen. She was a fortress. She was the storm that was coming for the people downstairs. I grabbed my leather briefcase, the one containing the burner phone and the evidence, and unlocked my bedroom door. It was time to go to war. The heavy mahogany doors swung open with a groan that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. I stepped across the threshold, and for a moment the only sound in the crowded gallery was the rhythmic, sharp click of my stilettos against the cold marble floor. The air inside smelled of stale coffee, dusty law books, and expensive lies. Every head turned. I could feel their eyes crawling over me like insects. To the strangers whispering in the pews, I was the unhinged sister from the morning headlines. I was the cautionary tale, the violent lunatic who tried to ruin a fairy tale wedding. They pointed behind their hands, dissecting my appearance, likely wondering if I had stolen the sharp navy power suit I was wearing. I kept my chin high and my gaze fixed forward. I did not look at the spectators who had come to watch a family tragedy as if it were a spectator sport. I looked straight at the plaintiff's table. There they were, my firing squad. My father Marcus sat with his chest puffed out wearing a suit that was slightly too tight around the middle, trying desperately to look like a concerned patriarch protecting his legacy. Beside him sat Richard Vance, the lawyer who had sold his soul for a retainer fee. Vance was shuffling papers with a bored expression, already mentally spending the commission he would make from liquidating my assets. And then there was my mother, Beatrice. She was not crying anymore. She was glowing. She looked like a queen presiding over a public execution. She wore a modest black dress and a string of pearls, the perfect costume for a long-suffering mother forced to make a heartbreaking choice. When our eyes met, she did not look away. She smiled. It was a small, tight smile that promised nothing but pain. I walked down the center aisle. My path took me right past their table. I could feel the heat of their hatred radiating off them like a physical force. As I passed, my mother leaned out into the aisle just enough to whisper so only I could hear. "Enjoy the walk, Nia," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "The transport van is waiting outside the back entrance. Better get used to wearing white and eating soft food." I did not stop. I did not flinch. I did not give her the satisfaction of a single blink. I simply walked to the defendant's table and set down my leather briefcase. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud that echoed through the room. I sat down alone. There was no lawyer beside me, no family behind me. To them, I looked isolated, defenseless, and defeated. But as I ran my hand over the scarred wood of the table, I felt a surge of electric power. They thought I was walking into a trap. They did not realize that I had walked into my office. This courtroom was not my cage. It was my hunting ground. And the hunt was about to begin. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from anticipation to confusion as the minutes ticked by. Usually Judge Miller was punctual, a creature of habit who wanted to clear his docket before his noon tea time. But the bench remained empty. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. My father Marcus tapped his watch impatiently. He whispered something to my mother, likely complaining that this delay was cutting into their celebratory lunch plans. I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded on the table in front of me. I knew what was happening behind those closed doors. The gears of the justice system were grinding, but they were not turning in the direction my family expected. The side door finally opened, but it was not the judge who stepped out. It was the court clerk. She looked flustered, her face pale as she clutched a stack of files against her chest. She walked quickly to the center of the room, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially the plaintiff's table. She cleared her throat, and her voice wavered slightly as she spoke into the microphone. "All parties, please be advised. The Honorable Judge Miller has taken ill suddenly and has recused himself from this morning's docket." A groan of annoyance went through the room. My father threw his hands up in the air. "Unbelievable," he muttered loud enough for me to hear. "We have to reschedule. We do not have time for this." The clerk raised her hand to silence the room. She was not finished. "Due to the urgent nature of the petition regarding an immediate threat to public safety, this case has been reassigned for immediate hearing. Presiding over this matter will be the Honorable Judge William Sterling." The sound of a pen dropping hit the floor like a gunshot. It came from the plaintiff's table. Richard Vance, the slick lawyer who had been smirking seconds ago, had turned a ghostly shade of gray. His hands, which had been so steady when he was lying, were now trembling. He knew that name. Every corrupt lawyer in Chicago knew that name. Judge Sterling was not a local magistrate. He was a visiting federal judge known as the Iron Hammer. He did not settle cases. He annihilated them. "Who is Sterling?" my father asked, looking at Vance's terrified face with confusion. "Why do you look like you just saw a ghost?" Vance swallowed hard, loosening his tie. He leaned in, whispering frantically to my parents, but in the silent room, his voice carried. Sterling is a legend, Marcus. He eats lawyers like me for breakfast. He is strict, he is brutal, and he is Chloe Kensington's uncle. My mother's eyes went wide. She grabbed Vance's arm, but instead of fear, a look of relief washed over her face. She was so blinded by her own narrative that she missed the danger entirely. That is perfect, she whispered excitedly. He is family. He is Chloe's uncle. He will want to protect the wedding. He will not want a crazy sister-in-law running around ruining his niece's big day. Vance paused, considering this. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and nodded slowly, convincing himself of the lie. You are right, Vance said, his confidence returning slightly. He hates scandal. He is old money. He will want this problem buried quickly and quietly. He will grant the conservatorship just to keep the Kensington name clean. This is actually a win for us. I watched them rationalize their own destruction. They thought nepotism would save them. They thought Judge Sterling would corrupt his own courtroom to save a wedding party. They did not know that the file sitting on Sterling's desk right now contained not just my medical records, but the forensic accounting of every dollar they had stolen. Vance picked up his pen and smiled at me, a pitying look that said I was done for. I returned the smile. It was the smile of a woman who knew that the judge walking through those doors was not coming to save the family reputation. He was coming to clean house. All rise. The bailiff voice cracked like a whip across the silent room. We stood up, not out of respect, but out of fear. Judge William Sterling emerged from his chambers, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was a man carved from granite and old money. He did not walk, he marched with the terrifying grace of a predator entering its territory. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his black robe billowed around him like the wings of a dark angel. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the lawyers. And he certainly did not look at my parents, who were practically vibrating with excitement. My father, Marcus, actually tried to wave. He raised his hand in a small, pathetic gesture of familiarity, a smile plastered on his face that said, "Look, we are family." He expected a nod. He expected a wink. He expected acknowledgement that they were on the same team. Judge Sterling did not even blink. He moved past the plaintiff's table as if my parents were invisible ghosts. He ascended the bench and sat down with a heavy finality that made the wood creak. "Be seated," Sterling said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. It was a voice that had sentenced men to death without a tremble. We sat. My mother Beatrice leaned over to my father, whispering loud enough for me to hear. "See, he is being professional," she said, her eyes darting back and forth. "He cannot show favoritism in public, but watch. But he is going to wrap this up in 5 minutes." Sterling adjusted the cuffs of his shirt beneath his robe. He reached into his briefcase, but he did not pull out the thin, flimsy petition my parents had filed. He pulled out a binder, a thick, heavy leather-bound binder that was at least 4 inches thick. It hit the desk with a loud thud that echoed like a gunshot. I saw Richard Vance, the slimy lawyer, flinch. He knew what a standard conservatorship file looked like. It was usually a few pages of medical notes and a financial summary. This was not that. This was an encyclopedia of evidence. Sterling reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses. He slid them down to the bridge of his nose and peered over them. His eyes were gray and cold, like the winter sky over Lake Michigan. He opened the binder. The room was so quiet I could hear the rustle of the paper as he turned the first page. He read in silence. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. The silence stretched until it became suffocating. My father started to sweat. He loosened his collar. He looked at Vance. Vance was staring at the binder, trying to read the upside-down text, but from the look of horror slowly spreading across his face, he realized that the document on the judge's desk was not something he had written. Sterling finally stopped turning pages. He took off his glasses and folded them slowly, placing them on top of the open file. He looked up. For the first time since he entered the room, he made eye contact. He did not look at me. He looked directly at my father. And in that look, there was no family warmth. There was only the cold, hard glare of a man who had just discovered a rat in his kitchen. My father took the stand, and if I did not know him better, I would have believed him myself. He did not just walk to the witness chair. He trudged as if the weight of the world was resting on his sloping shoulders. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket before he even sat down, dabbing at dry eyes with a practiced, trembling hand. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked like a loving father who had been pushed to the brink by a wayward child. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "State your name for the record," the bailiff said. "Marcus Washington." My father whispered, his voice breaking just enough to sound authentic. Mr. Vance stood up and walked toward the witness stand with a sympathetic nod. "Mr. Washington, I know this is difficult for you," Vance said softly. "Please tell the court why we are here today. Why are you asking for a permanent conservatorship over your daughter, Naya?" My father took a deep, shaky breath. He looked directly at Judge Sterling, his eyes wide and pleading. "It breaks my heart, Your Honor," Marcus began. "Nia has always been special, but in the last year she has drifted away from reality. She stopped taking her medication. She started buying these expensive suits she cannot afford. She wanders around the Federal Plaza telling strangers she is a United States attorney." He paused to wipe his nose. "She has created this fantasy world to cope with her failures. She failed the bar exam 3 times. Your Honor, we tried to support her, but the delusion has become dangerous. She believes she has the power to arrest people. She believes she is investigating us." Vance nodded gravely. "And has this delusion ever turned violent, Mr. Washington?" My father closed his eyes as if the memory was too painful to bear. "Last night," he said, his voice dropping to a hush, "we were having a quiet family dinner. Nia came out of her room screaming. She was rambling about forensic audits and federal prisons. When my son Jamal tried to calm her down, she attacked him. She threw a glass bottle at his head. If I had not intervened, she might have killed him. I sat at the defense table perfectly still. I did not gasp, I did not object. I let him weave the noose around his own neck. He was testifying under oath. He was lying to a federal judge about a federal officer. We are terrified. Your Honor," my father continued, tears finally streaming down his face. "We cannot sleep. We cannot live like this. She is a danger to herself and to society. I am asking the court to grant us full guardianship. Please let us take control so we can put her in a facility where she can get the help she needs. We just want our little girl back." He buried his face in his hands, sobbing loudly. The gallery murmured with sympathy. Even the court reporter looked sad. My mother was nodding from her seat, wiping her own eyes. They thought they had nailed the performance. They thought tears were evidence. But I looked up at the bench. Judge Sterling was not looking at my father with sympathy. He was looking at him with a mixture of disbelief and cold fury. My father had just claimed I was a failed law student to a man who had signed my commendation letter 6 months ago. The lie was so big it sucked the air out of the room. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court, I would like to present Exhibit A." Richard Vance said this with the swagger of a man holding a royal flush. He pointed a remote control at the large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall facing the gallery. The lights in the courtroom seemed to dim as all eyes shifted to the black rectangle. My father looked down at his hands, shaking his head, as if he could not bear to relive the trauma. My mother covered her eyes with a lace handkerchief, peeking through the fabric to gauge the audience reaction. The screen flickered to life. It was grainy footage taken from a hidden security camera installed in the kitchen of the rental mansion. I recognized the scene immediately. It was from the night before when I was locked inside. In reality, I had been standing at the counter calmly slicing a lemon for my water with a small paring knife. But the video playing on the screen was not reality. It was a digital Frankenstein. The footage had been sped up, making my calm movements look jerky and manic. The frame rate was manipulated to make it appear as though I was slashing at the air wildly. But the worst part was the audio. They had dubbed over the silence of the kitchen with a recording that chilled my blood. It was a woman's voice screaming at the top of her lungs, "I will kill you. I will burn this house down. You will all die." The voice was shrill and hysterical. It sounded nothing like me. It sounded like a bad actor reading lines from a horror movie script. But to the people in the gallery, it was terrifying. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. A woman in the back row let out a small shriek. The spectators looked from the screen to me with genuine horror. On the screen, the digital version of me stabbed the knife into the counter repeatedly, the sound effects amplified to sound like gunshots. Vance paused the video on a freeze frame where my face looked distorted by the low resolution, making me look truly deranged. "This is what the Washington family lives with every day, Your Honor," Vance said, his voice grave. "A woman who wields a knife like a weapon. A woman who screams death threats at the people who feed and clothe her. This is not a lawyer. This is a ticking time bomb." My mother let out a wail that echoed off the high ceilings. She buried her face in Jamal's shoulder, her body racking with manufactured sobs. "I cannot watch it again," she cried loud enough for the back row to hear. "Please turn it off. It is too scary." Jamal patted her back, looking at the judge with eyes full of fake fear. "See what she does to my mother?" Jamal said, pointing at me. "She is a monster." I stared at the screen. I watched the fake version of myself frozen in an act of violence I never committed. Most people would panic. They would jump up and scream that it was a lie, which would only prove they were unstable. I did not move. I looked at the timestamp on the video. I looked at the pixelation around my mouth, which did not match the audio track. It was a deep fake, a sloppy, hurried job done by someone who did not understand forensic video analysis. They thought this video was the nail in my coffin. They did not know they had just introduced a felony into evidence. Manufacturing digital evidence is a crime punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison. I looked at Vance and smiled. He just handed me his law license. The screen went black, but the digital echo of my fake screams still vibrated in the air. The courtroom was silent save for the theatrical sobbing of my mother. Richard Vance closed his laptop with a snap, looking at the judge with the smug satisfaction of a man who thought he had just delivered a checkmate. The gallery was buzzing with whispers. They looked at me with fear. They saw a violent woman who needed to be caged. My father sat in the witness box, wiping his face, looking at me with a mixture of triumph and fake pity. He thought he had broken me. He thought I would jump up and scream denial, which would only prove his point that I was unstable. Judge Sterling slowly turned his chair to face the defense table. He peered over his spectacles, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Washington." Sterling said, his voice deep and resonating. "You have heard the testimony. You have seen the video evidence presented by the plaintiff. This is a serious accusation. Do you wish to cross-examine the witness or offer a rebuttal at this time?" I stood up slowly. I did not rush. I smoothed the front of my navy suit and clasped my hands behind my back. I stood with the posture of a soldier on the parade ground. I looked at my father, who was watching me with narrow eyes. I looked at Vance, who was already packing up his briefcase. Then I looked at the judge. "No, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "I have no questions for the witness at this time." The room gasped. My father's jaw dropped. Vance froze. They expected a fight. They expected me to beg. In fact, I continued, my eyes locking onto my father. "I would encourage the plaintiffs to submit every single piece of evidence they have prepared. Let them tell every lie. Let them submit every doctored video. I want the record to be complete. I want to ensure that when the time comes, there is absolutely nothing left for them to say." My father's face turned a deep shade of purple. The calm authority in my voice triggered something primal in him. He could not stand that I was not afraid. He forgot where he was. He forgot the judge. He gripped the railing of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. "You see that?" "Your Honor," my father shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. You see how she talks. She is arrogant. She is mocking this court. She thinks she is untouchable. That is the mania talking. She is sick, I tell you. She is completely detached from reality. Judge Sterling did not bang his gavel. He simply watched my father unravel. He watched the mask of the grieving parent slip to reveal the desperate bully underneath. I remained standing silent and still. My father thought my silence was surrender. He did not know that in the federal justice system, silence is just the deep breath a sniper takes before pulling the trigger. Jamal strutted to the witness stand with the confidence of a man who believed the world was his stage. He did not look like a grieving brother. He looked like a celebrity giving an exclusive interview. He adjusted the lapels of his midnight blue tuxedo, which he was still wearing from the night before, and ran a hand through his hair. He winked at my mother, who blew him a subtle kiss from the front row. To the rest of the room, he played the part of the successful tech mogul, burdened by a disturbed sibling, but to me, he was just a parasite in Italian silk. He sat down and looked at Judge Sterling with a practiced charm that usually worked on investors he was scamming. My sister has always been difficult. Your Honor. Jamal began, his voice smooth and deep. He turned to face the gallery, making sure everyone saw his handsome profile. She has never been able to hold down a real job. She sees me building my empire, closing deals, and marrying into the Kensington family, and it eats her alive. Jealousy is a sickness. Your Honor, and Nia is terminally ill. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence hang in the air. He looked at me with the sneer that the jury could not see, but I felt it like a physical slap. She calls herself a lawyer, but we all know she is just a clerk, Jamal lied, effortless. She cannot stand that I am the successful one. Last night she did not just attack me, she went after my fiancé. The courtroom leaned in. This was the fresh meat they were waiting for. Jamal lowered his voice, leaning into the microphone, as if sharing a terrifying secret. She cornered me in the kitchen, Jamal said, his eyes widening with fake horror. She was holding a bottle of cleaning chemicals. She told me that if I married Chloe, she would ruin her face. She said she would throw acid on Chloe so that no one would ever want to look at her again. The gasp from the gallery was louder this time. It was a sound of pure revulsion. A woman in the back row covered her mouth. My mother let out a fresh wail of despair, burying her face in her hands. It was a lie so specific, so horrific, and so calculated that it stunned the room. Acid. He had accused a federal prosecutor of threatening to disfigure a woman with acid. Jamal stood up halfway in the witness box and pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. Look at her! Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with feigned emotion. She is sitting there so calm because she is a psychopath. She wants to destroy my happiness. She wants to hurt my wife. You have to lock her up, Your Honor. If you let her walk out of here, she will kill someone. I am begging you. Put her in a cage before she turns this wedding into a funeral. I looked at the tip of his finger pointing at me. I looked at his eyes, which were burning with malice. He thought he had just delivered the final blow. He thought the acid story was his masterpiece. He did not know that by accusing me of a specific violent felony on public record, he had just escalated this from a civil hearing to a criminal conspiracy. He wasn't just lying about his sister, he was perjuring himself to destroy a federal officer. I did not blink. I did not look away. I simply mentally added another 5 years to the sentence I was about to hand him. The word acid was still hanging in the air like toxic smoke. Jamal sat back in the witness chair, chest heaving slightly, looking like a hero who had just saved the city from a monster. My parents were gripping each other's hands, their faces glowing with anticipation. They were waiting for the gavel to slam down. They were waiting for the bailiffs to drag me away in chains. They were waiting for their victory. But the gavel did not fall. The only thing that moved in that courtroom was the air conditioning and the blood draining from Richard Vance's face. Judge Sterling had stopped reading. His hand, which had been methodically turning the pages of the thick black binder, froze mid-motion. The mention of his niece's name had pierced through the theatrics. He slowly closed the heavy file. The sound was soft, but in the deadly silence of the room, it sounded like a coffin lid clicking shut. He did not look at Jamal. He did not look at my weeping mother. He reached up and slowly removed his wire-rimmed reading glasses, folding them with deliberate, terrifying precision. He placed them on the mahogany bench next to the evidence. Then he moved. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was the movement of a titan waking up. Judge Sterling leaned forward. He leaned so far over the high bench that his black robe pooled around him like storm clouds. He ignored the plaintiff's table entirely. His gray eyes narrowed into slits, lasers cutting through the space between us. He locked his gaze directly onto me. He did not look at me like a criminal defendant. He did not look at me like a mental patient. He looked at me with the intense recognition of a general spotting another soldier on the battlefield. He studied my face, my posture, and the navy blue suit that he undoubtedly recognized from the federal hallways we both walked. The air in the room grew heavy with static electricity. My father smiled, thinking the judge was intimidating me. He was a fool. He did not realize that when a judge leans forward like that, he is not looking at the accused. He is looking at the only other person in the room who knows the law is about to become a weapon. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights and the terrified heartbeat of my lawyerless defense. Judge Sterling did not blink. He stared at me with an intensity that would have made a lesser woman crumble, but I held his gaze. I saw the gears turning behind his eyes. He was looking at my face and then looking down at the name on the docket and then back at my face. He was putting the pieces together. The puzzle was solving itself in real time. He cleared his throat. It was a dry, rasping sound that broke the trance of the room. "Excuse me," Judge Sterling said. His voice was no longer the boom of a deity. It was soft, almost trembling with disbelief. He ignored the sobbing mother and the preening brother. He spoke only to me. "Ms. Washington," he asked, leaning even closer to the microphone, "I need to clarify something for the record before I rule on this petition. Are you Nia Washington? The Nia Washington?" My father let out a nervous chuckle, standing up halfway. "Your Honor, please," my father interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do not let her confuse you. This is exactly what I warned you about. She mimics authority figures. She thinks she is famous. It is part of the psychosis." "Sit down," Sterling roared. He did not look at my father. He slammed his hand on the bench with such force that the water pitcher rattled. "You will remain silent, Mr. Washington, or I will have you removed in irons." My father collapsed back into his chair, mouth open like a fish. The judge turned his focus back to me. His eyes were wide, searching for confirmation. "Ms. Washington," the judge repeated, his voice shaking. "Are you the senior assistant United States attorney who helmed Operation Octopus last autumn? The prosecutor who dismantled the entire sprawling cartel network in the Midwest?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. The gallery went dead silent. Richard Vance dropped his pen. My mother stopped her fake crying instantly, her eyes darting around in confusion. Operation Octopus was the biggest federal case in Chicago history. It was all over the news. The prosecutor who led it was a ghost, a woman known only as the Grim Reaper, because she never gave interviews and never lost a case. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I looked Judge Sterling in the eye and gave him a curt, professional nod. "I am, Your Honor," I replied, my voice ringing clear and authoritative. "Lead prosecutor for the Northern District of Illinois, badge number 4922, and I am currently the subject of an active federal investigation regarding the people sitting at the plaintiff table." The judge fell back into his leather chair as if he had been punched in the chest. He took a deep breath, his face pale. He looked at my family not with annoyance, but with horror. He realized in that split second that he had almost signed a warrant to imprison one of the highest-ranking justice officials in the country based on the lies of a family of grifters. The look on his face shifted from confusion to a cold, terrifying rage. The revelation hit the courtroom like a bomb blast. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The color drained from my father's face so fast he looked like a corpse propped up in a suit. Jamal sat with his mouth open, the confident smirk finally wiped away, replaced by the dull, empty look of a man realizing he had bet his life on a lie. But my mother Beatrice, she did not freeze. She snapped. The delusion was too deep, the narrative too important. She could not let go of the script she had written for me. She jumped to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. Her face was twisted into a mask of ugly, desperate denial. She pointed a shaking finger at the judge, disregarding all protocol, disregarding her own lawyer who was trying to pull her down. "No," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You are wrong. You are confused. She is lying to you. Look at her. She is unemployed. She lives in a dump. She is a mental patient. She is sick. Do not listen to her. She is a nobody." She was hysterical, screaming over the murmurs of the crowd, desperate to drown out the truth. She thought if she screamed loud enough, reality would bend back to her will. She thought she could gaslight a federal judge. She was wrong. Judge Sterling's face turned a shade of red that promised violence. He raised the wooden gavel high above his head. He did not tap it. He brought it down with the force of a thunder god. Wham! The sound was deafening. It echoed off the marble walls like a cannon shot. The head of the gavel snapped cleanly off the handle and flew across the bench, landing on the floor with a hollow clatter. The violence of the act silenced my mother instantly. She froze, her mouth still open, her hand mid-gesture. "Silence," Judge Sterling roared. The veins in his neck were bulging against his collar. He stood up, towering over the bench, pointing a trembling finger directly at my mother. "You dare to scream in my court. You dare to call this officer of the court a nobody. Madam, you are not speaking about a mental patient. You are speaking about the woman who put the governor of Illinois in a federal penitentiary last year. You are speaking about the prosecutor who seized $50 million in cartel assets before breakfast." He leaned over the bench, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal growl. "You walked into my courtroom and asked me to imprison a woman who has done more for this country in 1 year than your entire family has done in a lifetime. You called her a failure. The only failure I see in this room is standing right there at the plaintiff table. Sit down and shut your mouth before I have you gagged and thrown in a cell for contempt." My mother collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. But this time the tears were real. They were the tears of a woman watching her world disintegrate. She looked at me terrified. And for the first time in my life, she did not see a victim. She saw the Grim Reaper. The broken gavel lay on the floor, a symbol of the order that had just been shattered. I stepped away from the defendant's table and walked to the center of the well. My parents were frozen statues of horror. Jamal looked like he was trying to solve a math equation in a language he did not speak. I stopped directly in front of the bench and looked up at the man who held the power of the state in his hands. I did not bow. I did not tremble. I reached into my jacket pocket and flipped the leather wallet open. The gold badge of the Department of Justice caught the overhead lights, shining like a miniature sun. The eagle, the scales, the authority. "Good morning, Judge Sterling," I said, my voice dropping the defensive tone and adopting the cool, clipped cadence of a prosecutor. "It has been a long time. I believe the last time we spoke was over scotch at the judicial conference in D.C. You were complaining about the humidity, and I was complaining about the lack of decent coffee on Capitol Hill." Sterling leaned back in his chair, a slow smile of recognition spreading across his face. He nodded slowly. "I remember," he said. "You are the one who lectured Justice Thomas on maritime law." I should have known. I should have recognized the eyes. They are the same eyes that stared down the cartel hitmen in the Martinez hearing. I closed the badge and pinned it to my lapel for the entire room to see. The glimmer of gold was a beacon of truth in a room filled with lies. I turned slightly so that my profile was visible to the gallery, but my focus remained on the judge. Please forgive the theatrical nature of my appearance and the rather unconventional venue. I continued smoothing my lapel. And I apologize for the silence. I could not identify myself until the plaintiffs had fully committed to their narrative under oath. You see, Judge, I am currently in the middle of an active undercover operation. Operation Broken Trust. I paused, letting the name of the operation hang in the air. My agency has been tracking a sophisticated ring of financial predators operating in the Gold Coast area. These individuals specialize in defrauding investors, embezzling from charitable trusts, and falsifying medical records to seize assets from vulnerable family members. I needed to see how far they would go. I needed to see if they would perjure themselves in a federal court to cover their debts. I turned around slowly to face my family. My father was gripping his chest. My mother was shaking her head in a silent spasm of denial. Jamal had sunk so low in his chair he was practically under the table. They did not disappoint, I said, cold and sharp. I am not here as a daughter today, Judge. I am here as the lead investigator. And the people sitting at that table are not my family. They are my targets. And they just confessed to conspiracy, fraud, and perjury on the official record. I looked back at Sterling. Permission to treat the plaintiffs as hostile suspects, Your Honor. Sterling picked up the handle of his broken gavel and pointed it at my father. Permission granted, Agent Washington. The floor is yours. Burn them down. I walked back to the defense table and placed my hand on the worn leather handle of my briefcase. It was scratched and faded, a stark contrast to the Italian designer bags sitting at the plaintiff's table. But unlike their accessories, which held only lipstick and lies, mine held the weight of the federal government. I snapped the brass latches open. The sound was sharp and final, like the cocking of a weapon. I flipped the lid, revealing a stack of thick files, each stamped with the bold red letters, classified. I pulled out the top file and turned to face the room. Your Honor, I am waiving my right to court-appointed counsel. I stated, my voice filling the room with icy precision. I will be representing myself. And furthermore, pursuant to the authority granted by my badge, I am converting this hearing into a preliminary arraignment. My father stood up, his face a mask of panic. You cannot do that, he stammered, looking at the judge. She is the defendant. We are the victims. This is a civil matter. Sit down, Mr. Washington, I commanded, not even looking at him. You are no longer the plaintiff. You are now suspect number 1 in a federal racketeering investigation. I opened the file and began to read, my pace measured and relentless. I was no longer a daughter speaking to a father. I was a prosecutor reading an indictment. Count 1 against Marcus and Beatrice Washington, wire fraud and grand larceny. The evidence shows that at 3 a.m. this morning you accessed a custodial account under my name and illegally transferred $400,000 to a shell company controlled by a wedding planner. You claimed I was destitute while holding the digital receipt of your theft in your pocket. I pulled out a bank record and slapped it onto the table. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. Count 2 against Jamal Washington, securities fraud and embezzlement. You testified under oath that you are a successful tech mogul. The documents in my hand, obtained via federal warrant, show that you have embezzled $2 million from the employee pension fund of your last startup to pay for online gambling debts. You are not marrying Chloe Kensington for love. You are marrying her to use her trust fund to cover your crimes before the SEC audit next month. Jamal's face went gray. He looked like he was going to be sick. And finally, count 3 against all parties, including legal counsel Richard Vance. Conspiracy to deprive civil rights and perjury. You knowingly filed false affidavits. You bribed a medical professional, Dr. Aris, to falsify a diagnosis. You edited video evidence to frame a federal officer. You stood in this court and lied about acid attacks and violence to weaponize the justice system against your own blood. I looked up from the file. The room was deathly silent. My family was shrinking into their chairs, stripped of their pretenses. They were naked before the law. You wanted to lock me away because you thought I was the only thing standing between you and the Kensington fortune, I said, closing the file with a heavy thud. You were right. But you forgot one thing. I do not just know the law. I am the law. And I am finding the defendants guilty on all counts. I turned to Judge Sterling, who was watching with a look of grim satisfaction. Your Honor, the prosecution requests that the defendants be remanded into custody immediately. They are a significant flight risk, and frankly, they have annoyed this court enough for one lifetime. I reached into my briefcase one last time. I did not pull out a standard manila folder. I pulled out a file jacket that was bright blood red. In the federal prosecutor's office, we have a name for this kind of file. We call it the Widowmaker. It is reserved for crimes so morally bankrupt that they demand the maximum sentence allowed by law. I held it up high so the light hit the glossy surface. Jamal flinched as if I was holding a grenade. He knew what was inside. He knew that the encrypted laptop I seized from his room earlier that morning had already been cracked by my forensic team. Your Honor, I said, walking slowly toward the witness stand. My brother has painted a picture of himself as a visionary, a tech genius waiting for his big break, but the only thing Jamal has built is a pyramid of lies built on the backs of the vulnerable. I slapped the red file onto the ledge of the witness box. Inside this file is the ledger for something called the Angel Fund. It was pitched as a revolutionary cryptocurrency investment exclusive to members of our local church. Jamal stood at the pulpit on Sundays. He prayed with the elders, he held their hands, and then he convinced 50 senior citizens to liquidate their retirement accounts. He promised them a 300% return. He promised them a legacy for their grandchildren. The gallery murmured in horror. The neighbors who attended that same church gasped. He raised $5 million in 3 months. I continued, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. $5 million from teachers, bus drivers, and nurses. And where is that money now? It is not in the market. It is not in a blockchain. It is gone. Spent on luxury cars, designer watches, and the deposit for this wedding venue. Jamal shook his head violently, sweat flying from his forehead. That is a lie. He stammered, his voice thin and weak. It was a market crash. I lost it in the crash. I am a victim, too. I leaned in close, invading his personal space. There was no crash, Jamal, because there was no coin. It was a Ponzi scheme. And the worst part is the wedding. You were not just marrying Chloe to pay off debt. You set up a shell corporation in her name without her knowledge. You planned to funnel the wedding gifts and the Kensington Trust disbursements through that account to make the stolen $5 million look like legitimate income. You were going to turn your marriage into a money laundering operation and make your wife an accessory to federal fraud. I turned to the judge. He is not just a thief, Your Honor. He is a predator who eats his own community. He stole the last years of peace from 50 elderly people just so he could wear a tuxedo for a day. This is not a civil dispute. This is a $5 million felony. Jamal slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. The arrogant tech bro was gone. All that remained was a small, greedy boy who had finally been caught with his hand in the jar. And the jar was about to snap shut on his wrist. I turned my back on the broken figure of my brother and faced the true architects of this nightmare. My parents sat at the plaintiff table, huddled together like rats on a sinking ship. They were no longer looking at me with disdain. They were looking at me with terror. I walked over to them, holding a stack of crumpled papers in my hand. These were not official bank documents printed on crisp linen paper. These were dirty promissory notes stained with coffee and desperation. I let them fall from my hand, fluttering down onto the table like dead leaves. Exhibit C, Your Honor. I announced, my voice cutting through the tension. These are loan agreements signed 3 months ago. They are for a total of $500,000 borrowed from a private lending syndicate known for breaking legs rather than charging late fees. The borrower listed is Nia Washington. But a forensic handwriting analysis completed this morning confirms that the signature is a forgery. It was signed by Marcus Washington. My father tried to speak, but only a strangled noise came out of his throat. You gambled away your retirement, I said, leaning over the table, my eyes locking onto his. You mortgaged the house and lost that too. And when the loan sharks came knocking, you decided to offer them my life as payment. You forged my name hoping that once I was locked away in a facility, you could liquidate my assets to save your own skins. You were not trying to protect me, you were trying to pay a ransom. My mother found her voice then. It was shrill and desperate. We did it for the family, she cried, clutching my father's arm. We were going to pay it back. We just needed access to your accounts for a few months. We love you, Nia. We would never hurt you. I laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound that made the bailiff flinch. You love me, I repeated. Let us test that theory. I pulled out my phone and connected it wirelessly to the courtroom's audio system. The speakers popped and hissed before settling into clarity. Your Honor, I submit Exhibit D. This is a digital recording taken last night while I was locked in a storage closet. This is the unedited conversation between two loving parents. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the cavernous room loud and clear. We cannot just hold her for 72 hours. She will get out. We need something permanent. If we get the conservatorship, we get control of her assets. We get the apartment. Then my father's voice booming and cruel. I will call Vance now. We will have her committed by sunrise. She will never step foot in a courtroom again unless she is in shackles. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with shock. She had not known I was listening. She had not known that her own greed was being recorded for a federal indictment. That does not sound like love, Mother, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. That sounds like kidnapping. That sounds like fraud. That sounds like two people who were willing to erase their own daughter's existence for a penthouse apartment and a quick payout. Judge Sterling stood up. He did not look at the files anymore. He looked at my parents with pure, unadulterated disgust. In 30 years on the bench, Sterling said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. I have seen murderers, thieves, and cartel bosses, but I have never seen a betrayal this vile. You did not come here for justice. You came here to use this court as a weapon to bury your crime. He turned to the bailiff. Officer, lock the doors. Nobody leaves this room. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom flew open with a force that startled the bailiff. He reached for his weapon instinctively, but lowered it just as quickly when he saw who was standing in the frame. It was not a threat. It was the final nail in the coffin. Chloe Kensington stood there. She was not wearing the designer gown she had been fitting for earlier that morning. She was wearing a simple coat over her shoulders, and her face was pale, not with fear, but with a fury that burned brighter than the fluorescent lights. I had sent her a text message exactly 30 minutes ago. It contained only two things: the address of this courtroom and a live audio link to the proceedings. She had not just walked in, she had been listening. She had heard Jamal call her a walking bank account. She had heard my father admit to the forgery. She had heard the detailed plan to turn her wedding into a money laundering scheme. Jamal saw her, and for a second the delusion returned. He scrambled to his feet, wiping the sweat from his upper lip, putting on the mask of the doting fiancé one last time. Chloe, baby, he stammered, taking a step toward the aisle. Thank God you are here. You have to help me. Nia is lying. She is twisting everything. Tell the judge about our love. Tell him we are going to be happy. Chloe did not speak. She walked down the center aisle. Her steps were heavy and deliberate. She passed my parents, who were cowering in their seats, unable to even look at the woman they had planned to exploit. She walked right past me. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. There was no anger in her gaze toward me anymore, only a profound, tragic gratitude. She stopped inches from Jamal. He reached out to take her hand. They are trying to frame me, Chloe, he pleaded, his voice cracking. We can fix this. Just sign the papers and we can go to Paris tonight. Chloe looked at his outstretched hand and then up at his face. She saw the desperation. She saw the greed. She saw the man who had sold her out before he even said I do. She pulled her hand back and swung. The sound of the slap was louder than the judge's gavel. It was a sharp, violent crack that echoed off the marble walls. Jamal's head snapped to the side. He stumbled back, gripping the railing of the witness box to keep from falling. A red handprint bloomed instantly on his cheek, matching the color of the red file I had placed on the ledge. "You bastard," Chloe said. Her voice was not loud, but it was shaking with the force of her heartbreak. "You were not marrying me. You were stealing me. You were going to send me to prison for your debts." She reached down to her left hand. She struggled for a moment, pulling at the large diamond ring that sat on her finger. The ring that was likely bought with stolen pension money. She yanked it off. "I defended you," she spat, throwing the ring at him. It hit him squarely in the chest and bounced onto the dirty floor, rolling away under the table. "I fought my father for you. I told my family you were different. And all this time you were just laughing at me." Jamal opened his mouth to speak, to spin one last lie, but Chloe cut him off. "Do not speak," she commanded, pointing a manicured finger in his face. "Do not say my name. Do not come near my house. If you ever try to contact me again, my uncle won't be the one judging you. My father will handle it. And you know what that means." She turned her back on him. She did not look at my parents. She walked over to the defense table and stood next to me. She was not a witness for the defense. She was an ally. The room was silent save for Jamal's ragged breathing. He looked at the empty floor where the ring had fallen and finally realized that the game was over. Judge Sterling did not waste a single second. He pulled a fresh sheet of paper from his own files, uncapped his fountain pen, and signed his name with a jagged, angry stroke that tore through the fiber of the document. He did not look up as he spoke, but his voice boomed with the absolute authority of a man who had seen enough. "Bailiffs, execute the warrants," Sterling commanded. "Remand all 3 defendants into federal custody immediately. No bail, no phone calls. They are flight risks, and they are a danger to the integrity of this court." The reaction was instantaneous. The side doors burst open again, but this time it was not a family member. It was a squad of U.S. Marshals, their tactical vests bulky and intimidating, their faces impassive. They moved like a wave of black water surrounding the plaintiff's table. The sound of heavy boots on marble drowned out the stunned gasps of the gallery. Jamal was the first to break. When the marshal grabbed his wrist and twisted it behind his back, the reality of the situation shattered his fragile ego. The handcuffs ratcheted shut with a cold metallic click. He did not look at me. He did not look at the judge. He looked at his mother. "It was her idea," Jamal screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. He thrashed against the marshal's grip, spit flying from his mouth. "I did not want to do it. She made me. She told me to file the petition. She told me to lie about the acid. I am innocent. She is the one you want. She is the mastermind." My mother Beatrice, who had spent her entire life pampering him, shielding him, and worshipping him, looked at her golden boy with horror. A marshal pulled her arms back and she let out a yelp of pain as the steel cuffs bit into her wrists. "How dare you!" she shrieked, struggling against the officer. "I did this for you. I stole for you. I lied for you. You ungrateful little parasite. You spent the money. You gambled it away. Tell them, Marcus. Tell them it was Jamal's debt." But my father was not coming to save them. He was too busy trying to save himself. As 2 marshals hauled him out of his chair, he went limp, his legs dragging on the floor like a dead weight. "I did not know anything," Marcus yelled, his eyes bulging. "I am just an old man. They tricked me. My son is a liar. He forged the documents. I have a heart condition. You cannot arrest me. I am a victim here. It was all Jamal. He ruined us." It was a pathetic, ugly spectacle. The family that had stood so united in their cruelty only an hour ago was now devouring itself. They were like wolves caught in a trap, biting at each other's throats in a desperate attempt to get free. Jamal kicked at his father. Beatrice tried to bite the marshal holding her. They screamed accusations, old resentments, and confessed crimes over each other, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of greed and cowardice. I stood perfectly still next to the empty defense table, my hand resting on my briefcase. I watched them being dragged up the center aisle. They passed the people they had tried to fool. They passed the neighbors they had tried to impress. They passed Chloe, who stood with her back to them, staring at the flag behind the judge's bench. As they were shoved through the double doors, Jamal looked back one last time. His eyes met mine. There was no defiance left. Only the terrified realization that the sister he had mocked, the sister he had underestimated, had just ended his life. "Get them out of my sight," Judge Sterling ordered, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. The door slammed shut, cutting off their screams. The silence that rushed back into the courtroom was heavy and pure. It was the sound of an infection being cleansed. I took a deep breath. The air tasted different. It tasted like justice. The procession of the damned halted for a brief second near the defense table. The marshals were efficient, but my mother Beatrice possessed the hysterical strength of a drowning woman. She dug her heels into the marble floor and twisted her body violently, forcing the officers to pause or risk breaking her arm. She was not looking at her husband or her son anymore. She was looking at me. Her eyes were wide and red-rimmed, filled with a terror that was finely genuine. She lunged forward, her cuffed hands awkward and heavy, but she managed to snag the sleeve of my navy jacket. "Nia, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking into a desperate wail. "You have to stop this. Tell them to let me go. I am your mother. I gave birth to you. I raised you. You cannot let them take me to a federal prison. I will die in there, Nia. Please, baby, look at me. It is Mommy." She clawed at my fabric, her nails digging in, trying to find the little girl she used to manipulate. She thought that biology was a get-out-of-jail-free card. She thought that if she squeezed hard enough, she could wring a drop of mercy out of me. She was wrong. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked down at her hands gripping my sleeve. They were the same hands that had signed the fraudulent loan documents. The same hands that had struck me countless times when I was a child. The same hands that had wiped away fake tears only an hour ago to frame me. I felt nothing, no pity, no anger. No, just a cold clinical detachment. I looked at the marshal holding her left arm. He nodded, slightly understanding the dynamic. I reached out with my own hand. I did not hold hers. I peeled her fingers off my jacket one by one. The pinky, the ring finger, the middle, the index. It took effort. She was holding on for her life. But I was stronger. I released her hands and they fell uselessly against her chest, clanking against the steel of the handcuffs. I took a step back, creating a chasm of distance between us. Then slowly and deliberately, I raised my hand to my sleeve. I brushed the fabric where she had touched me. I dusted it off, as if she had left a smear of filth on my armor. I smoothed the wool until it was perfect again. "You are confused, madam," I said, my voice low and devoid of any warmth. "You are looking for a daughter who used to beg for your approval. You are looking for a victim who used to apologize for existing. That girl is gone. You killed her a long time ago with your cruelty." My mother stared at me, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. "You did not lose a daughter today, Beatrice," I continued, leaning in so only she could hear the final verdict. "You lost her the moment you signed that petition. The woman standing in front of you is not your child. I am Senior Assistant United States Attorney Washington, and I suggest you save your tears for the sentencing hearing." I signaled the marshal. "Take her away." Beatrice let out a strangled cry as the officers yanked her forward. She stumbled, her heels skidding on the floor, dragging her toward the door where her husband and son had already vanished. I watched her go. I did not turn away until the doors slammed shut, sealing my past behind them forever. I stood alone in the silence of the courtroom. My sleeve was clean. My conscience was clear. And for the first time in my life, I was free. The wheels of justice grind slow, but they grind exceeding fine. In the weeks that followed the courtroom drama, I ensured that the grinding was relentless. There were no plea bargains. There were no deals for reduced time. I recused myself from the direct prosecution to avoid a conflict of interest, but I handed my colleagues a case so watertight it was practically bulletproof. The sentencing hearing was not a debate. It was a funeral for the Washington family legacy. Jamal stood before the court stripped of his tuxedo and his arrogance. He wore the bright orange jumpsuit of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. It clashed horribly with his complexion, but it matched his future perfectly. The judge read the verdict with a stone face. 15 years for wire fraud, securities fraud, and running a Ponzi scheme that targeted the vulnerable. 15 years. He would be 40 years old when he breathed free air again. As the gavel fell, Jamal did not scream. He simply slumped against the podium, realizing that his crypto empire had been reduced to a 6x8 concrete cell where the only currency was cigarettes and protection. My parents, Marcus and Beatrice, came next. They looked small and frail standing in the dock. The prison system does not treat vanity well. Without her makeup and expensive dyes, my mother looked 20 years older. Without his tailored suits, my father looked like a confused old man. They were sentenced to 5 years each for forgery conspiracy and filing false police reports. 5 years in federal prison. They would miss the holidays. They would miss the birthdays. They would spend their golden years staring at cinder-block walls, surrounded by the consequences of their own greed. They were led away in shackles, shuffling toward a future where they were no longer the masters of their own house, but merely inmates in the state's custody. Then came the dismantling of their kingdom. I stood outside the rental mansion and watched the asset forfeiture team do their work. It was a surgical operation. The U.S. Marshals moved in and stripped the house bare. The leased luxury cars were towed from the driveway. The art on the walls, the silver in the drawers, the jewelry my mother prized above her own children, it was all seized. Every single asset was tagged, crated, and sold at auction. The proceeds were not kept by the government. I ensured that every penny went into a restitution fund for the 50 elderly church members Jamal had scammed. I watched a marshal slap a sticker onto the heavy oak front door. Seized by order of the United States District Court. The house was empty. The bank accounts were zeroed out. The reputation they had killed to protect was in tatters. They had wanted to take everything from me. They had wanted to leave me with nothing. Instead, they had lost it all. The wind blew through the empty driveway, scattering a few dead leaves across the manicured lawn. It was over. The Washington family was not just bankrupt, they were extinct. The heavy brass doors of the federal courthouse swung open, and I stepped out into the blinding brightness of the midday sun. The air was crisp and cold, but to me it felt like the first breath of spring. I paused at the top of the marble steps, letting the winter light wash over me, scrubbing away the stench of the courtroom and the toxic history of my family. Behind me, the marshals were processing 3 new inmates. But ahead of me lay the city of Chicago, sprawling and magnificent, and for the first time, completely mine. I adjusted my sunglasses and walked down the steps. My heels clicked against the concrete, a rhythm of absolute victory. There were no reporters, no paparazzi. I had sealed the records to protect the integrity of the agency. This was a private war, and I had won a total victory. A sleek black government SUV was idling at the curb. The driver, a stoic agent I had worked with for years, stepped out and opened the rear door. He gave me a respectful nod. It was a stark contrast to the police van my mother had tried to force me into. This was power. This was respect. But before I climbed into the safety of the vehicle, I had one last piece of business to attend to. One last connection that needed to be saved from the wreckage. I pulled my personal phone from my pocket and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a frail, trembling voice answered. Hello, it was my grandmother. She was the only person in that cursed bloodline who had ever held me without checking for a wallet. She was the one who hid me when my father was angry. She was the one who sent me secret letters when I was in law school. My parents had dumped her in a state-run nursing home years ago, claiming they could not afford her care while they leased luxury cars. Grandma, I said, my voice softening, losing the hard edge of the prosecutor. It is Nia. Nia, baby, she rasped. Is everything okay? I had a bad feeling. Everything is perfect, Grandma. I said, smiling for the first time in 24 hours. I want you to pack your bags, all of them. Pack, she asked, confused. Where am I going? You are coming home, I said, fighting back tears. You are coming to live with me in the penthouse. No more nurses, no more roommates, just us. We have a lot of lost time to make up for. And Grandma, we are going to throw a party, a big one. I heard her gasp on the other end, followed by the sound of joyful weeping. I will get my hat, she whispered. I hung up the phone and climbed into the SUV. The heavy door closed with a solid, reassuring thud, sealing out the noise of the city. The leather seat was cool and comfortable. As the car pulled away from the curb, merging into the flow of traffic, I watched the courthouse fade into the distance in the rearview mirror. It was just a building now, a tomb for the people who had tried to destroy me. The scene shifted. I was no longer in the car. I was sitting in a velvet armchair in my living room, holding a crystal glass of vintage champagne. The city skyline twinkled behind me through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked directly into the camera, breaking the fourth wall, addressing the audience who had watched my dismantling of the Washington Empire. I swirled the golden liquid in the glass, watching the bubbles rise to the top just like the truth always does. They wanted to treat me like disposables, I said, my voice low and dangerous. They wanted to throw me away to clear space for their greed. They thought I was garbage. I raised the glass in a mock toast to the empty air where my family used to be. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the taste of vindication. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly how I took out the trash. The screen faded to black, leaving only the sound of a single triumphant click of a glass being set down on a table. The most profound lesson from Nia's victory is that true power does not need to scream, it only needs to wait. Her family mistook her silence for weakness, and her humility for failure, proving that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you underestimate. Success is not about the applause you receive, but the competence you build in the shadows. We learn that you must never set yourself on fire to keep others warm, not even family. Stand firm in your truth, keep your receipts, and let your results be your loudest defense. Drop a wata. Comments if you are ready to move in silence and let your success make the noise.